Hello and happy March. February flew, didn't it? It felt like it was about 4 minutes long. But somehow in that I managed to read 10 books. Before we get started, my name's Vicky. I work in children's publishing in London and I am into reading and nature and crafts and all that wholesome stuff. I started the month with The Order of the Pure Moon Reflected in Water by Zen Cho. This cute little novel starts with a bandit walking into a coffee house and kicking off a fight. In the aftermath of this fight, Im, a young nun and a waitress at the coffee house, ends up joining this group of bandits. This turns into a real story of found family with some really nice exploration of gender identity, and I needed more of it. It was sweet and fun to read and I really liked the prose. But it's so short and it felt, rather than a complete novella, it felt like a taster of a full-length novel. Being so short, it didn't get the chance to fully flesh out and explore this world and the war and the different belief systems, and we didn't get to know either the main characters or the other bandits as much as I'd have liked. And spoiler warning, skip ahead to here if you don't want to hear this next bit. The ending felt really kind of out of nowhere. Im suddenly having these powers that we didn't know about. I just got to that and I was like, wait, since when could she do all this magical stuff? If that had been in there from the start, that could have been really fun, but it just kind of sprung up and helped end that bit of the story, and then it was done. But I will definitely be keeping an eye out for more work by Zen Cho, and if this does ever become a full-length novel, I will definitely be getting my hands on a copy. My first library book of February was Aarti and the Blue Gods by Jasbinder Bilan. Asher and the Spirit Bird by the same author was the first middle grade novel I read when I started getting back into that age category a couple of years ago, and she is a really creative, beautiful writer. This story centres around Aarti, who for as long as she can remember has lived on a remote island somewhere off Scotland with Aunt. And Aunt is not always very kind to Aarti. She's quite a woman to live with. And on top of that, Aarti feels like there's part of herself that she doesn't know about. She has these weird fragments of memories and she feels like something is being kept from her. And when something happens to Aunt one day, and then when a strange boy washes up half drowned on the island, Aarti finally gets the chance to get some answers. My favourite parts of this book were the descriptions of the island, which were beautiful and really evocative, and the way that the story combined mythology from two different places and two different cultures. Pacing and plot-wise though, this one wasn't quite there for me. The first half, I'd say, felt quite slow. I know we needed to set up Aarti's situation and the things she was dealing with, but I think that whole feeling could have been established in about half the number of pages, and as a result that left the second half, where there was a lot more going on, feeling quite rushed. I also just want to point out, as a trigger warning, because it's not completely clear from the blurb, but there's quite a lot of mention of abuse and a really difficult relationship, and spoiler alert, this does also deal with abduction, just in case you want to be aware. Overall, I did enjoy reading this. Plot, pacing issues aside, the setting was magical and Aarti is a great main character, and I maintain Jasbinder Bilan is a fantastic middle grade writer. February was the month when I finally got round to reading The Song of Achilles by Madeline Miller. I don't feel like I need to say too much about this one because I feel I'm one of the only people that hadn't read it, but this follows Patroclus and Achilles from their childhood as they become friends and then lovers, and later as they are forced to head off to fight in the Trojan War. I am really behind on Greek retellings and I love Greek mythology, so this is the start of my effort to catch up. I really enjoyed this, but I wouldn't say I loved it as much as a lot of people did. I feel like the pacing slowed quite a bit when we got to the war, even though we were skipping over years and months at a time. I also feel, as much as I liked Patroclus and as much as I just wanted him to be okay, even though I knew he couldn't be, I feel like there could have been a bit more to him as a character. From what I understand, in the Iliad, Patroclus was a formidable warrior and he was almost equal to Achilles. And I think that could have been a really fascinating dynamic, seeing the relationship, the love between two men who were equal, rather than Patroclus kind of trailing around after Achilles, watching from a distance as Achilles is brilliant. And for all it wasn't perfect, this is still a great read. It's lovely to see a relationship in its entirety, from the moment it starts right to the end, and ooh, did the end get to me. And then I picked up Hourglass by Keiran Goddard purely for this gorgeous cover. This is a quirky little love story told in really short sections and written sort of a sentence or two at a time. It's very stream of consciousness as a man reflects on a relationship from just before it began, through the relationship, and after it's ended. And it is definitely a front runner for one of the weirdest books I've ever read. I will put a photo of this section, which I just sort of sat and stared at for a while. Like, did I actually just read that? I feel like this one's going to be quite divisive. I've seen some great reviews of people loving the glimpse into this character's brain and his views on the relationship. And it undoubtedly is incredibly original. So if you're looking for something in a different format, or if you like really sort of reflective, introspective books, then maybe give it a go. For me, it was too bizarre and too rambly. And then I listened to The Gentleman's Guide to Vice and Virtue by Mackenzi Lee. This is a historical adventure rom-com centering around Monty. Monty is a young man in the 1700s. He's just been kicked out of his college for having a relationship with another boy, and his father is threatening to disown him. As lots of young rich men did around this time, Monty is about to set off on his grand tour of Europe, travelling for a year with his best friend Percy, who he happens to be completely in love with. They're also forced to take Monty's younger sister Felicity with them part of the way before they drop her off at boarding school. But it's not long before Monty makes a characteristic, rash decision and does something at a party in Versailles that puts the whole group in danger, derails the tour, and sets them off on this dash across Europe. I think if you enjoy Lex Croucher's books, Reputation and Infamous, you'll like the way this story's told. It's set in the 18th century, I think, but it feels very modern. The writing, I would say, is even more modern than Lex's. And if you've watched Our Flag Means Death, and you're looking for something else that has that same two men pining for each other, each thinking it's unrequited love, and both being ignorant, this has you covered. As a main character, I don't think Monty's going to be for everyone. He's a bit of a dickhead, but in a lovable kind of way. He's pretty self-absorbed, he makes selfish decisions, he's a bit of a coward, but that didn't bother me that much. I still liked him for most of it. Sometimes he was annoying, but mostly he was fun. Percy is warm and sensible and probably my favourite character in the book. And Felicity has no time for anyone's nonsense, and she is arguably the most capable of the three of them, and their dynamics were great. They made a really fun central trio. I really appreciated that this book didn't romanticise the time period in terms of how things like race and disability and sexuality and being a woman were viewed. These were all important to the plot, and they each presented a real challenge, as they would have done. And even with addressing all these very real and potentially quite heavy issues, this still managed to be a really light and silly and fun road trip rom-com. It's fast-paced and funny. Maybe as the story goes on, the plot gets a bit far-fetched, and that might be too much for some people. But if you are just looking for something that is really good fun, I don't think you can go too far wrong with this one. Valentine Crow and Mr. Death by Jenni Spangler is a really charming middle grade. Valentine Crow is an orphan, and he's grown up at the Foundling Hospital. But at the age of 12, he and his best friend Philomena are being sent off to start their apprenticeships. Philomena goes off, I think, to be a maid, and through an admin error, Valentine gets apprenticed to Death. Once he's got used to the idea, the apprenticeship gets off to a pretty good start, but then Valentine finds Philomena on the list of souls he's meant to collect and help move on. For a book entirely about death, this was warm and funny and had some really beautiful moments, and I think it could potentially be really helpful for any children that are worried about death. I know around this age it was something I thought about probably too much, and there are some lovely parts in this that kind of settle that a bit. The humour is quirky, it kind of feels like Ghosts, the BBC series, and Death as a character is amazing. He is wise and ancient, but he's also imperfect and funny and kind. There are maybe a few little inconsistencies in the plot, but overall, really enjoyed this one. I do a lot of my reading these days on my train commute into and out of London, so what better to read than a book set largely around the London Underground. This is Neverwhere by Neil Gaiman, illustrated gorgeously by Chris Riddell. Neverwhere follows Richard Mayhew, a man who lives, at the start of the novel, a pretty boring life. He works a generic office job, he's engaged to a beautiful woman who doesn't seem to like him very much, and he's just kind of wafting through life, vaguely dissatisfied with everything. And then one night, walking through London with his fiancée, a door opens in a wall, a door that wasn't there before, and an injured girl falls out. The girl's name is Daw, and meeting her brings Richard into this secret alternative version of London known as London Below, where he meets this whole host of fantastical characters and gets swept up in a dangerous quest. It's like Alice in Wonderland, but quirkier and funnier and slightly grimier. No one writes fantasy quite like Neil Gaiman. He somehow is super distinctive, but every book he writes feels quite different. I don't know, he's magical. He's so brilliant with his characters and his originality and his way with words. I loved all the characters and places based on London tube station names, and if you're from London or you know London, I think that adds an extra element to it. If you prefer books with a small key set of characters, maybe this one isn't for you, because Richard meets so many characters and goes to so many different places, but that's one of the things I enjoyed about it. The illustrations in this edition are incredible and they really add to the experience. I would like more adult novels to be illustrated, please. There are some sort of at the edges of pages like this, and then you've got full page illustrations, and his art style is just gorgeous. I want to find you my favourite. There it is. I just really like this little toad. For a complete genre switch, I then went for The Manifesto on How to Be Interesting by Holly Bourne. This is a contemporary YA following Bree, a 17-year-old girl who feels like she doesn't fit in. She dreams of being a published writer, but her stories keep getting rejected. And one day she's had enough. She decides she needs to become more interesting so that her writing can be more interesting. She seems to equate popular with interesting, and so her plan involves infiltrating the cool group of girls at school. It's essentially Mean Girls, but set in a posh English school, and I'm quite torn on how I feel about it. Holly Bourne is clearly a great writer, and there were moments where I felt like she captured the feeling of being a teenager better than I'd seen in other YA. But I didn't love the plot, and I didn't like Bree. The next bit's gonna get spoilery, so skip to here if you don't want that. Bree's makeover and her transformation and her rise to popularity all just seemed too easy to me. She said herself, this isn't going to be like the movies, I'm not just going to get a haircut and everyone will like me. But then that's literally what she does. Bree makes so many horrible decisions in the name of this project. And this is one of the bits I'm most torn on, because I know 17-year-olds do make really stupid decisions. We all did, maybe not on this level, but 17-year-olds make stupid choices. But I think there were too many for me, and she's making all these decisions like, I really don't want to do this, but she doesn't have to. She has made the steps of this plan. She's decided that these are the things she needs to do to be interesting, when there are lots of other ways to be interesting. But maybe that's intentional. Maybe it is commenting on the fact that at that age you think the only way to be interesting is to be popular, in which case it's very clever, but to read, I found Bree so frustrating. Final criticism. I did not like the student-teacher relationship. I did not like that there were no consequences of it by the end. But the moments where they were meant to be being sweet and affectionate, if it wasn't a student and a teacher, I can see that Holly Bourne writes relationships and people really well. So I didn't love this story and this set of characters, but I definitely want to give Holly Bourne another go, because I can tell she's a good writer, and I think with a different story we'd get on much better. Another tone shift, my next read was the first book in the Locke and Key series by Joe Hill and Gabriel Rodriguez. I picked up this graphic novel because I've watched the first couple of seasons of the Netflix adaptation, and I was really interested to see how much it differed from the original material. Otherwise, this is not something I'd ever have gravitated towards. I don't like horror, I don't like creepy stuff, but having watched the show, I couldn't resist this when I found it in Oxfam. Locke and Key follows the Lockes, who move up to the old family home when the father of the family is murdered. The youngest of the 3 Locke children finds a strange key, which is the start of the Locke kids finding that this house is full of keys that each do a different mysterious thing. And then there's also the matter of the lady at the bottom of the well. It was fascinating reading this, having seen the show, because everything happens in a very different order. They've moved a lot around. The book is also a lot more graphic and violent, which I guess is less distressing in illustration, whereas the show goes for more mystical, creepy vibes. If you can't deal with any sort of depiction of blood or violence, don't read this, but I am very squeamish, and the art style is cartoony enough that I was fine with it. As an example, no blood on this page. This is the art style, and this I think is the first look at Locke House. And we only come across the first few keys in this book, so now I'm going to have to carry on with the series because I want to see how they do all the keys in the novels. And for my final tone shift of the month, I finished February with the gorgeous, quiet little novella that is Small Things Like These by Claire Keegan. This is set in the run-up to Christmas in 1985 in a little town in southeast Ireland, and it centres around Bill Furlong, a father of 5 girls who works delivering coal and wood. In a time when lots of people are struggling financially, their family's doing okay, they're pretty comfortable. But he's still worrying about whether his girls will be fed and schooled and happy, and whether his wife is happy with their life. And I liked him a lot. He's really warm and caring and kind-hearted. Amongst his visits to his different customers and their chats about the weather and Christmas and other small talk, he comes across a situation that forces him to think about the way the church is treating young unmarried mothers, and the way that the people that live in the town, whether knowingly or unknowingly, are complicit in that to a degree. Claire Keegan is a fantastic writer. I haven't read any of her stuff before, but now I can see why everyone's talking about her. She managed to fit so much into such a short little book while keeping the prose feeling lyrical and not rammed with loads of stuff happening. I listened to this audiobook while I was working, and I think really I need to listen to it again to fully appreciate her writing and the story. It's only just over 2 hours long, so that's definitely doable. So those are the 10 books I read in February. I'm keeping it very varied because that's how I like to read. I'm happiest when I'm bouncing between genres and age categories and physical books and audiobooks. I wish you a very happy March. I've got some good books on my TBR for this month, so I'm looking forward to talking to you about those when I've read them. And until then, happy reading, look after yourselves.